So we just finished reading Seminar by Theresa Rebeck, and so before we get into it, just a couple little fun facts that I know. So Seminar debuted in 2010 on Broadway with Jerry O'Connell, Hamish Linklater, and Alan Rickman as three of the stars in the show. Also, fun fact: Theresa Rebeck was one of the showrunners and writers for Smash season 1. So, if any of this sounds a little familiar, it's probably because you are all people who watch Smash. And you've all just outed yourselves as people who watch Smash.
I told my business.
So my first question to everybody is, what were y'all's first impressions on the play?
Well, personally, I had the fortune of my first impression being actually seeing Alan Rickman and the original cast do it on Broadway, and Lily Rabe also as Kate, who was
Yes, thank you.
was fantastic. I went, I'm a huge Alan Rickman fan, so I went to see him, and he was, fantastic. So that was my first impression of the play. I feel like any sort of deeper meanings of the play kind of weren't on my radar back when I saw it, just because I was so, starstruck at just being in the same room as Alan Rickman. But it was cool this time, being able to, experience this play sans Alan Rickman, to be able to actually take it for what it is on its own. Yeah.
This was my first time. I wasn't familiar with this piece of hers, but reading through it a little bit just yesterday real quick to kind of get the gist, I really enjoy just the language, right? It's so natural seeming, even just reading it. It kind of comes out in the way that in our modern vernacular, like kind of in the way that she punctuates things too, it or lack of at times, lends itself to the way that we speak and run on and kind of mash things together while we're trying to work things out. And, it's just really, really encapsulates that so well. And it seems like without trying so hard, it's not all this punctuation and different things to try to give you the impression that they're stammering. It's like, no, it's just kind of, sometimes it's run together because it's coming out so quick. And so the language and then the way it also lays in the text was something I really enjoyed as my first impression with the script.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you on that. I think in some of the ways that she writes, like you said, a lot of playwrights still use like the ellipses and kind of put in those thinking moments. It seems like with Rebeck's work, the way that she writes it, she writes the same word a few times over. I think it's in one of Martin's speeches. He says like "you," I think 3 or 4 times in a row, where he just kind of says "you, you, you," and you can see she uses that as a device as Martin's kind of like coming up with his thoughts and putting it together. So I think that's a really cool way that she writes. It definitely feels pretty natural as it goes through. It's also very funny. Like she does a really good job with the language and just the way that it's written to get the jokes in there. But anyone else?
I when I was in acting school, this was one of those plays that everybody wanted to do for their acting scenes. So I was familiar with it. And later on, I found out Alan Rickman was in the original cast. And I tried to imagine him, the great Alan Rickman, in that delicious chocolate dipped in sex voice saying pussy and SpongeBob. And I can't imagine it, first of all. But second of all, it was cool. I think my impression when I then read the play, I liked that juxtaposition between, the writers and different kinds of writers, people who are really whorish or masturbatory in their work, or we all know actors like that too, or sometimes we can be like that, or the people who are like, all right, I guess I'm going to sleep with this guy to get a career, or I'm going to be a ghostwriter. And it's cool seeing these people, like a writer trying to find their voice, also writers trying to find where they fit in this industry.
I think on that note, it's also really interesting, just to mention, obviously she's a feminist playwright, and as a first lead up question, no shame to Ethan, he named the 3 male actors in the play and not the women. And that's such an interesting thing that it still seems like even a female writing the play, the men's parts stood out to us more than the females' parts. And probably the playwright's maybe experience or relevance with Kate wanting to be a writer and how no one cared about her or maybe wanted to sleep with her to get to the top or whatever that sort of thing is within the industry, to bring sort of the 2 sides of the female trope. Either one's a man-hating lesbian, which they mention at one point, like, are you a lesbian? Because she's like, I'd be on top. You know, either it's either you're a lesbian or you're a slut. There's one or the other. And so they bring those 2 sides of the female into this, and then the men are men who then rag on the females or do or don't care about them. And even in one of the speeches, there's a comment where Leonard makes a comment about I forget the exact line, but it's like, oh, you'll just ring up your credit cards as if you're a woman. And so it's funny that even she like puts in those little jabs at females to like poke fun at it. She's like, this is what men say, this is what they would say as a feminist playwright, to like make fun of it.
Little do they know, we don't want all that debt. We're not trying to do that. Absolutely not.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. I think like the Kate character in particular definitely like follows, like you said, like a very standard typical, like she probably like liberal arts English major, BFA, MFA, whatever. She follows a similar trope, but I felt that there was more of a gravity or a knowing of that experience, like being a female playwright. Like I thought though she played into the trope, she was still cultivating it from a very real place. Being a slightly like type A person myself, like I found the language and even her like defense, it didn't feel as oh, and there's my cat. It didn't feel she was like, I heard we're talking about lesbian playwrights, I need to make an appearance. But it didn't feel as like projected or any sort of hyperbole. It felt very much like, yeah, no, I'm literally just trying to figure out how to get my work seen and be understood and not put in that category. So I think the fact then that she's essentially sculpting a play that does focus mostly, or at least gives much of the focus to the male characters, it is a bit of irony, or that juxtaposition so intentional. Like I'm gonna give you these seedlings of truth, and they're going to be masked because that is what the industry of these characters also experiences.
I think it's interesting too. We're seeing a lot of the women through the eyes of the men, like we talked about, and when you look at them through the eyes of the men, it becomes that 2-dimensional trope of Izzy's the one who sleeps with all the guys and Kate's the one who's type A, but they're both 3-dimensional. When you look at them through their own eyes, you see Kate is willing to sleep with Leonard, and Izzy's smart, and she knows more than she lets on. But I think the playwright's very smart and very, what's the word I'm looking for? She knows what she's doing and trying to insert that point of view.
Well, and I think she has such a a sort of cavalier way about her, especially in the comment where she says, like, you think that's naive that Izzy thinks that this will help her? That's not naive. She knows exactly what she's doing. And I think there's something very interesting about that perspective as well. Yeah. She's like, that's not naive. I wouldn't do it. Wait, maybe I would. Maybe I will. And by the end she is. So
I want to piggyback off that. I read that one line and I was like, yes, shout out to my girl Izzy, because she knows what's up. She knows what's up, because sometimes you got to do what you got to do. And that might not be her first go-to, because that might not be her judge. Because I believe Izzy is honestly talented enough to do the work, and for it to, not saying that that other girl wasn't talented, but she understands, like, she may not have to, she would do that because she wanted to, not because she felt like she had to. Whereas I low-key think, was it Kate? I think she thought that it would help her. To me, that's what I kind of got. And I don't think Izzy would have thought that all the way. Like, I think she would have been like, no, I'm good. If I want to do it, it's because I want to, like, throw it back. Like, that's what I want to do.
Well, I think as we got to the end of the play, like, you know, we're right. Like, they all kind of got something from Leonard in the end. Like, even if he was a dick about it, you know, he helped all four of them really, but like find their own paths and find their way to go forward with it. So kind of jumping off of that into the next question, like, what do we think Rebeck is saying about the literary world, the way that she talks about it, the way that she talks about the publishing world, some of the ways that, like, Izzy and Kate kind of go forward with their sexuality, or Douglas being a name with a recognition and kind of writing very specific style of fictions, you know? You think maybe she's saying, like, this is how it has to be. You have to find that niche, or it's not worth getting into, or the cost that it, you know, what you have to pay to get there.
I mean, I don't know anything about the literary world specifically myself, but I felt like in my experience in the acting world, I was drawing stuff, and I think really, honestly, with any industry, these are, I mean, we've already mentioned that these are sort of archetypes of people, right? There's like mediocre but somebody, and talented but nobody, and the intellectual privileged prude, and the maybe not so talented but like in control floozy or whatever, right? But like, and like we've said, they were all more developed than that. But when you realize, like, okay, we're kind of like showcasing these different things, and I feel like within any industry, you know, people always say, you know, it's who you know, and these types of things, to get foots in the door, and all of this, that kind of talk, and those little things, I think are things people say about any profession and industry they're in, and especially in New York City. It's like, oh, it's such a grind, and there's so many people, you know, you have to use whatever you have. And if you have your name, or you have privilege and money, or you have a good body, or whatever the case is, like, you're just gonna, you know, at a certain point you have to go, they talk a lot about morality and ethics too. It's like, am I willing to use those things to get me in, instead of only being validated by my talent or my work? And at a certain point, am I willing to go ahead and do that? And is that okay? And what do people think about me doing that? You know, I think it's kind of, I'm sure everyone can sort of relate in any different industry, really.
I agree entirely. I think the word, like, negotiation comes to mind. It's the negotiation as someone navigating and trying to achieve some sort of, I don't know, getting their work out there. It's either you're negotiating and compromising yourself as an artist, or the art itself. Like, are you willing to let go, in Douglas's case, of like what is the work you really want to be doing for what is more commercially successful, or in either of the girls' cases, needing to lose a little bit of themselves, or in another telling, like, take that power, claim that sexual power to be able to get ahead. And I mean, I don't know, it's kind of within a bubble, because we have the subject of writing or fiction, but then it's also set in the context of playwriting, which is also a very male-dominated industry. Most plays mostly feature men. Like, it's kind of like a bit of a Russian doll scenario with the theme.
Yeah, I'd say it's you know, it's you could say it's a pessimistic view of the industry, the specific industry, but it might just be a realistic view of the industry, which just happens to be pessimistic in a way, in just that this is what it is. I think with this read, what struck me was just how the the female characters do just kind of fall away, in a sense. And on the surface, that seems like, oh, why would she do this? You know, but then it's like, that just seems more like a commentary on like, that's what it is, like kind of a depressing commentary on it is what it is, and you know, the focus is going to be where it's going to be. Yeah.
Another thought that comes to mind is like the intersection of class in this, because we're also talking about like the negotiation of trying to get ahead when these are already all very privileged people, like all presumably educated at a good school. And you know, Kate, obviously her family's wealth is known. We get a little sense of financial struggle with Martin, but again, like it kind of talks, there's this idea of this like lack of accessibility in these industries, and you have to already be operating at a place of privilege to be even in the ranks of being considered. So I would have liked, I mean, there's no like, I don't feel like she's making a commentary on that in the sense that all of them appear to be operating at a similar level, but I'd be interested for your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a good question. Like you wonder, even if you take the story that Kate had of Luis, like if that was a real story, this is a guy that wrote that story but doesn't have. I mean, just to get into Leonard's class is $5,000 for 10 weeks. Like, just to scrape that money together is already sets the bar at a certain level of privilege for sure. And I think when you reach that and when you understand, like, some of them are making sacrifices, but you know, if you look at them, I think when you see Kate living in her 9-bedroom apartment, which I have to just
$800.
Yeah, I have to assume it's just a
Even
whole
contemplate
floor
that.
of an apartment building, because that would be, you know, 6 different apartments, 7 different apartments, the way it would be now. Martin somehow scraped together $5,000, which is impressive. Izzy still lives at home with her parents, so it means they have some space. And Douglas obviously like has a famous uncle and has a name that he's used to get into at least a number of different like conservatories. So yeah, there's definitely a level of privilege that comes with all that. I think you're right, Brooke. Like trying to figure out what even is the step underneath that, because so many of those people, like, they have the time to sit and work on their writing, which is great, and you have that time is amazing. But I think, you know, speaking as all of us who are in the art, in the performing world, in some type of like world, to find that time while still trying to survive is difficult.
Every time I see another acting class I want to sign up for and it's like a few $100s, I'm like, can I swing this? Is this the one that I really want to do? Or should I better invest in this other class that I saw? Or these 10 other classes? Like, which is the correct thing? Because I can't possibly afford to do them all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I end up doing none at all. Is basically what happens.
No, I do think it's interesting too that I think y'all have all pointed out really well that like the women writers, Kate, Izzy, kind of fade into the background, and it becomes a little bit more about Martin's story through the whole thing. He's very clearly like the one who feels the strongest about the morals of the writing world and the things that he has to do, which is like, it's nice that he's on his high horse, but he's kind of the only one also that doesn't really have any redeeming qualities about him. And that way he very much mirrors Leonard in my mind. Like, you know, Izzy definitely uses her sexuality a little bit, but she's very, like you guys said, she's very aware of what's going on. She reads the room really well. She saves Martin from being a jackass at some point. Douglas does have a heart, even if he's a little conceited. And Kate, like, lets Martin stay for free, hosts the seminar in her apartment. You know, they've all kind of have redeeming qualities except for Martin. Except that he's a
I'd say though that looking at each of the characters' arcs, you see again, going back to like the morals and what you're willing to do despite your privilege or your class or where your position is. What are you willing to do to be quote unquote successful? Martin, when he finally shares his work, he's so already disillusioned or disenchanted or whatever by the whole thing and thinks it's a sham that he doesn't even trust Leonard saying this is actually really good. And when he comes back to the house later, weeks later or whatever, he's still standing by that. Like, I feel like he's kind of everyone else has changed. I mean, Kate goes from being the sexually inadequate whatever to like walking around naked in his apartment looking for panties. Like that's quite an arc, but she was willing to do that to be successful. Everyone's made some different choices, and I feel like Martin was kind of like consistent in it, being like, I like, this can't be the way. There's got to be another way. You have to have ethics and morals. Like, he's always bringing that kind of compass up to the others. So I feel like and in the end, he finally goes, he kind of turns the mirror back on Leonard, and they find a mutual respect for each other and decide to work together. So I almost feel like, yeah, Martin's realistic and he's flawed like each of us, but was consistent or like stuck to whatever his morals were. He stuck to them throughout.
Yeah.
I would like to throw out. Oh, sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
Okay, I'm gonna wait till she finishes because I have something to say.
Oh, I was gonna just say that I want to say Izzy is super consistent the entire time. She knows what she's doing. She doesn't care. She doesn't pretend to be in love with anybody. She's sleeping with everybody.
Hey.
And none of that really affects her writing either. She's also the most forthcoming in terms of she's not scared. She's like, I don't know, I wrote this the other day. Take a look at it. I'm gonna write a sex novel. Like, she, and then I'm going to show my tits on the cover. Like, I don't really care. Like, she is who she is, and she's super proud of it, and, like, is like, I don't care. And like, in that sense, I don't know that she sleeps with the intent of it helping her. I think, like you said earlier, Carissa, like, it's just, like, who
Just does it because she wants to.
She is who she
she's
is.
like, I'm going to do this.
That's why I connected with her so much. I was like, she is me. I am her. Hey. But to go back with, what was I gonna say? Oh man, did I lose my thought? Kate. The fact that I feel like they acted like Kate was her feelings got kind of mulled over, because Kate is a little bit petty, because the fact that she knew she was on the phone with the other person and she said, "Where's my panties?" Where? That's not accidental. That's subliminal. Not even subliminal. That's just shady.
Yeah, she's putting it in his face.
Like, literally. Like, and it doesn't have to be that way, because if you were honest about what you were doing or how you felt in the first place, none of this would have been going on.
Well, it's so interesting, too, because the two, I think Kate makes a comment at the end with Martin, and Martin says, like, we were good together. Meanwhile, in the whole duration of the play, it's not clear that they had ever slept together. Perhaps there was, like, some sort of tension.
It was emotional, I feel like.
Yeah, well, there was some sort of tension or something that was hinted at, perhaps, of like, oh, do you still like each other? Like Izzy says in the beginning, where she seems like she's going to be that kind of girl who's like, don't go after my man, but then it's irrelevant to everything else Izzy stands for. But it's interesting in that sense that the one perhaps launching activity, Martin and Kate, if they had just been together instead of Izzy and Martin, perhaps Kate wouldn't have felt inadequate to then go after Leonard or to sleep with Leonard in the end. And it's one of the only relationships that aren't mentioned that they had slept together until the very end of the play, where it's only alluded to. We don't even know for sure of like, we were good together, which I think is
I literally always thought that it was Lizzie and Martin, and then Kate was in there at some point, and then Lizzie came in, and then Kate like kind of like went to the side, but she was still pissed about it.
Well, because at certain points in the text, like she says, just because none of you want to sleep with me doesn't mean that I'm inadequate or not capable of doing these sexual acts. So in my reading of it, like it seems like it's implied that none of them have slept with her, when in fact at some point, either before that comment or during the duration of the play, whether it was a comment that they didn't want to sleep with her anymore, or if it were after the fact of that comment, that her and Martin had in fact had some kind of
Yeah, something was going on. Something in the milk wasn't clean.
yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, I just read Martin and Kate as like the friends like the will they won't they, but then ultimately the circumstances and the politics of this group both decided it wouldn't, and she's upset by it, but then she's had loss in power not only for her artistic integrity but also for her sexual identity, and so she goes off to reclaim both via Leonard.
Yeah. I think one of the things, especially to take away from all of it is, like, yeah, I think Jacob's right in that Martin has these principles and morals, but he also freeloads into Kate's apartment and just uses it as a place to hang out and also a sex pad, and doesn't really take into account how it could be making her feel or anything.